listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you live from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send an email, tell me what you think, who you would like to have on the show, what topics you would like us to discuss. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And you can listen to the X-Zone as well as the X-Zone show that we do Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern until midnight at www.xzoneradiotv.com. During the rest of the 24-hour clock, we play the best of the X-Zone, and that's at www.xzoneradiotv.com. And don't forget, starting March the 21st, from 3 p.m. Pacific until 7 p.m. Pacific, the X-Zone radio show will be on the Mutual Broadcast Network and their broadcast affiliates right across the United States. Once again, X-Zone at X-Zone Radio TV is the website, and on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. My guest this hour is Brandi Stark, and she's a professor of Humanities and Religious Studies at St. Petersburg College. As an academic, she has explored the role of liminal state beings as forms of cultural expression. This bled into an interest in ghost stories and paranormal investigations. She started investigating locally alleged haunted hotspots in St. Petersburg, but it was after a short lecture on local haunts that she met others interested in doing the same. In 2000, Brandi founded the Spirits of St. Petersburg Ghost Investigation Team. Now on its 16th year, members work on researching local legends, do paranormal investigations, do historic ghost tours, and offer lectures. The group is, the group's work is to support a positive position on the supernatural world, promoting reason and compassion for both the living and non-living. The website, www.spiritsofstpetersburg.com. And Brandi Stark, welcome to the show. Great having you with us, Brandi.
Well, thank you. I am very excited to be here. We've had it planned for a couple months, and I'm delighted.
Well, we're happy to have you here, Brandi. You know, you bring a lot of credibility to the paranormal, being a professor of Humanities and Religious Studies at St. Petersburg College. How do you find your tenure as a professor works in conjunction with the investigations that you do?
Actually, I'm very lucky. I was explaining a little earlier that when I first started doing paranormal investigation, it was before this was very popular. So I actually started in 1997 and was kind of doing my own thing. It wasn't really talked about in academic circles, and of course it's during this time period in the 1990s that scientists were kind of getting together and starting to complain against the TV shows that were coming out that were classified as scientific, but they were showing paranormal things, and they actually had that reclassification put in as entertainment. So, you know, when I started out, it was a little bit different. But over the years, my first thesis was actually on the role of ghosts in Roman religion, and I've done papers on Christianity and Judaism, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Shakespeare, which we were talking about, since it's going to be the Ides of March. And it's really helped me quite a bit, because with the humanities, we're actually looking at cultural expression. And so I really kind of explain my research as part of that cultural expression through the liminal states. So I've done a little bit of work on werewolves and some of the other kinds of liminal beings, but my primary focus has always been death, afterlife, and liminal states, those things that are in between.
You know what I've never understood, Brandy, is why some groups call it ghost hunting. Because to me, when you hunt something, your object is to catch it or kill it. And you can't catch a ghost and you can't kill something that's already dead.
That's right. And, of course, there's always that old paranormalist joke, I'm strictly trap and release, So when it comes to ghost hunting, it's why I try to do something like paranormal investigation. It is important to try to distinguish that. And I also think it's really important to have some of that folkloric content as a background study. There's legend, there's folklore, there's urban legends.
Yep.
And then there's even the religious understanding. And so kind of coming in with some of that background, there's certainly a lot of things that you can apply to paranormal investigation.
Brandy, we've got to take our first break. Please stand by. Exonation. Brandi Stark is our special guest. She is a professor of Humanities and Religious Studies at St. Petersburg College. Her website is www.spiritsofstpetersburg.com. And we'll both be back, including bringing some spirits with us on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Brandi Stark is our guest. www.spiritsofstpetersburg.com. Brandi, what was it that happened in the life of Brandi Stark that got her to the point where she wanted to organize a group investigating the paranormal that we now know as the Spirits of St. Petersburg Ghost Investigating Team?
Actually, it was very odd. I started reading about mythology when I was in third grade, and I always thought the gods and the goddesses and everything with it was fantastic. And then, of course, there were ghost stories that kind of tied into that. And I remember starting to read about the ESP. This was back in the day when everything was put into one book. So you would have ESP, the Loch Ness Monster, ghosts, poltergeists. And I was fascinated by it, but I was terrified. As a child, I was completely afraid I would see something. I mean, it was terrible. And as I got older, particularly once I got into college, and I really started to kind of get a grasp on how to study and ways to do research, it really gave this nice direction and focus. And the irony of ironies is that, I started doing research on the role of ghosts in Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is I still lecture on today. And I talked to my grandmother about it, and of course she was a very pious Christian woman. We would discuss this stuff, and it was really exciting, but I never saw anything until I actually graduated with my first graduate degree. My grandmother passed away about 10 days later, and I actually knew before I was told because it was the middle of the night. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I was awakened by an aroma of flowers, and actually I call it flowers. I couldn't even really identify it, but it was beautiful. I felt completely at peace. I knew she had died, to look at the clock and get the time, and that it was okay. And I was so calm. And I'd been waiting for this moment my entire life, and it was just so opposite of what I expected. It was very peaceful. And I'm not really as sensitive. I'm not psychic. I tell my students, if they ask questions, I'm like, look, I don't see a thing. I'm an academic. It's totally different. But it was enough that it started to give me that experience. And when I went to talk at I'm also an artist on the side. I do wire art. So when I was talking at a gallery for a Halloween show, there was a book called The Tampa Bay Triangle that had come out, and I was working at the University of South Florida in the library, and I got this book, and I loved it. It was the first thing out about anything in this area. And so I was talking about some of the urban legends, and I had done some research outside, and these two people afterwards came up, Lee and Karen West, and they said, we're interested in this too. They were house inspectors. They were retired from, I phone company or something along those lines. I think it was GE, but I'm not 100% sure. And they were doing kind of post-retirement careers, and so they were doing house inspection. They had all of the equipment. I had the information, and so we started. And it was fantastic. We had 4 members total at that point. It was like a little family. But when you start to see some of these things happen, one case we actually had all of our equipment. It was a haunting with a suicide. I had my video recorder actually plugged into the wall because the battery had drained so much. All of our equipment, we asked the question, did you commit suicide? Everything shut down, including the camera that was plugged into the wall. The batteries just drained out of everything. And it was things like that that, really brought a new awareness. And I started dealing with homeowners because a lot of times people would contact us and say, you're going to think I'm crazy.
Right.
And I'd have to say, well, yeah, exactly. But, trying to give them at least a safe space to talk about what's been happening, and to find out that some of what they're experiencing is actually, it's categorized. It's in
Sure.
here. It gave them a little bit of peace. And, of course, the other factor that I find with the paranormal is that it so often is accompanied by fear. And yet, if you look at a lot of the shamanic there's a different understanding of the paranormal. You deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
You might be in awe of it,
Right.
granted, and even some fear. But there's a different type of respect and understanding. And so trying to kind of encapsulate that and trying to tell the homeowners, if the entity really wanted you out, you'd be out. I mean, this is, it's just letting you know it's
Mm-hmm.
here. And we started getting reports back that everything calmed down, that there was a great deal of calmness. And usually this lasts about 6 weeks before phenomena either mildly would show up or, homeowners every now and again would send me an update email. But it was completely fascinating, and to start learning about backgrounds and even our own culture. We do have kind of a fear culture here in the West of the dead because, of course, it goes against the norms. And,
Of course,
and
yeah.
usually the Judaic ideal, you're born, you live, you die. It's a straight line. And there is an afterlife, at least Christianity and Islam. Judaism, it's going to depend on the rabbi you talk to. But anything that comes out of that goes against that order is going to be considered, particularly after King James II of England, it starts becoming obviously demonic. It's going against the natural order. So, trying to kind of say, well, what you've got here, it's a mild haunting or
Mm-hmm.
the residue, or usually half the time it's family. So it's kind of interesting. People might be curious. When the TV shows came out, it did certainly change that dynamic quite a bit. But we have really tried to stay very true to that mission of respect. We're not out to make fun of anyone. We're not out to antagonize the dead. We're not out to antagonize the living. It's this idea of what can we do? How can we make
Sure.
this work? So it's been fun.
Yeah, we were talking about, you were talking about the way that people looked at the paranormal, and a lot of people fear it. And yet, in our earlier parts of our civilization, we used to praise it. We used to glorify it. And by that I mean, when you look at the Bible, it is filled with paranormal activity that people to this very day still worship.
That's true.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting because if you look, now those are liminal states, and it's certainly supernatural and paranormal, but they're different types,
Mm-hmm.
right? So biblically, you have Saul and Samuel. When I was still in graduate school, I had this wonderful professor. His name was Dr. Strange. I loved it. And I bet him that I could find a ghost story anywhere, including, at this point, I think I did just the Protestant Bible, because he had a Baptist background. Never, ever, ever make a bet like that, because I had to write this 25-page paper on this little story, but it's very significant, and it was historically debated, because what exactly did Saul see? Did he see the shade of Samuel, Was it an illusion? Because, again, by the time, we're looking through a lens, we're looking back in time. And so there's been rabbinical review and there's been Christian review, and it becomes something really dynamic. But again, Saul's cursed for doing this. He breaks the laws of Deuteronomy. And because of that, of course, he is destined to be essentially with Samuel within, 24 hours. So it's certainly there, but again, it's set aside. It's certainly set apart. And it's fascinating to see, though. Usually if it's godly based, again, it's going to be revered. Stopping the sun in the sky, dividing the fish and the loaves, Muhammad and his transcendence into heaven and meeting the prophets. It's God-based versus humanity going out and messing with things that they're not supposed to. And that's the trick.
And then again, when you look at religious books, religious dogma, religious philosophies, you are looking at the constant fight, the constant battle between good and evil.
Unless you are perhaps an indigenous tribe or a Voodoo, you make an accord with evil. What will it take to make you leave me alone? You make a deal. And, of course, the West rejects that. You're either with evil or you're against it. The East, it gets complicated in the East. But, is it merely perception? Jainism says there is no good or evil. Truly, we must transcend above it. Good and evil are parts of our conditioned reality. And Godhead, ascending to Godhead, is beyond conditioned. It's beyond duality. It's fascinating stuff. It can blow your mind, and it has. It's something that some scholars have gone insane thinking about, but it's amazing at the same time. So again, we have a very strong cultural lens that kind of guides us into which direction we're going to go into. And, of course, in modernity, that cultural lens, religion is weakening, particularly as a force of culture. I have proposed to my students many times that culture was initially based upon religion as kind of an undertone, but now religion is very much based on culture. We're certainly seeing this division throughout as to how to adapt to modern culture.
But do you think it is possible for an old religion like Christianity to adapt to the ever-growing modernization of the 20th century and so many of the people who are leaving the church for that very reason, because Christianity and other religions just cannot keep up with the time?
It is fascinating because, again, you have this huge swath of divisions between the incredibly liberal churches that are very much adapting. They're completely online, or whatever it is that they have, versus the very hardcore conservative, which is usually what people associate with religion. It is actually a minority, but it's a vocal minority. So that is a good question. And what do we do when TV shows like The Walking Dead are taking off? We have this, and of course that is in and of itself a cultural fear, right? So our two major predators are micro and ourselves.
But
so we now have
we've got to take our break at the bottom of the hour, sweetie. But listen, talking about birth and death, from the moment we are conceived, that's the very moment we start to die.
Isn't that the irony? And religion recognizes that. It's great. But it's confusing.
We'll talk more on the other side of this break. Great having you with us, Brandy. Brandy Stark is a professor of Humanities and Religious Studies at St. Petersburg College. And her website, www.spiritsofstpetersburg.com. When we come back, let's talk about ghosts. How about animal ghosts? And a lot more. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Brandy Stark is our special guest, www.spiritsofstpteresburg.com. All right, let's do a little bit of talking here about ghosts, because you and your organization, you deal in ghosts, you deal in spirits, and a lot of different groups and organizations do not talk about animal ghosts. And I have to ask you this, Brandy, do animal ghosts exist?
Now, this is where things get interesting. So, from my perspective, they absolutely do. There's a big debate in the West about how animals have consciousness. Now, if we think about a ghost or a spirit, it is a disembodied consciousness. So it has an awareness. It interacts, depending on the type of ghost or spirit. But it's kind of an interesting idea. So what I think is really unique is that the West is now starting to realize that, by golly, animals do have consciousness. They are aware, they do think, they emote, they have empathy, they make decisions to help one another. I think some of the best studies that have come out have been on rats, and that rats will hold a morsel of food back for a fellow in distress, or they'll try to save one in distress. And that we've always really attributed to humans. So I think it's really interesting, and this is another cultural outreach because, of course, pets have become super important to us today. The Rainbow Bridge as one of the ideas, this poem about when I die, I will meet all of my deceased pets. So from what I can tell you, yes, they do. They actually, it's kind of interesting, the reports of animal ghosts, or at least animal sensing ghosts, I found all the way back to Greco-Roman time periods. There are some great little stories. There's a Roman ghost story about a man whose wife died, and he cremated her body in accordance to the fashion, but her body on transport lost a sandal, and she was walking around in the underworld with only one sandal on, and she was very upset about this, so her ghost manifest and demanded this other sandal. And the little, they had basically like a Pomeranian, her little dog barked at the spirit, which is what alerted the man. Now, in ancient Egypt, I have found spells that actually say if you want to get back at your enemy, and this is a terrible spell, and I'm not advocating it, but you drown a cat. And as you do so, you tell the cat, yeah, it's sad, you tell the cat that your enemy is killing it. And so the cat's ghost, its spirit, its revenge, will haunt your enemy. So these are going way back to the ancient times, but my foray actually started, there's a twofold interest that I have. I am a third-generation pug owner. I have pugs, which I do explain are not dogs. They are part human, part canine, and part feline. I'm quite certain they should be their own species. But I actually created a paranormal pugs page. I was younger, and I thought, pugs are so artificial. They have no survival skills. They're definitely made to be companions. They have no real purpose other than friendship. They're social creatures. So I created this page, and lo and behold, people started emailing me stories about their pugs either sensing ghosts, but more often than not, seeing their deceased pugs as ghosts.
Wow.
And it was usually a one-time phenomena, or it was very quick. And, of course, you have to apply the process. Perhaps it's grieving. Perhaps we are projecting this idea. It's very Freudian, but, it's our melancholy that's projected out and creating this ghost, a tulpa, whatever. But I started getting so many of them. And then I started having people emailing me saying, thank you for posting this site. At least I feel better. My pug has just died, or my dog has just died, whatever it happened to have been. So I ended up altering the Paranormal Pugs page from kind of this slightly tongue-in-cheek idea to a more serious page. And I think it's one of the best-known pages that I have, ironically enough. I have yet to see a pug as a ghost, so I'm okay with that, though. But it's interesting to have the response. And as I started dealing with the pugs, I started getting other stories. So felines, rodents, pet rats, believe it or not. I started asking questions like, well, how come we're seeing, pets very much associated with humanity, but we're not seeing wild animals? I mean, shouldn't this world be haunted by everything that was ever here? And it just kind of kept branching out. One of my favorite phenomena, though, is what's called a shadow animal. if you're familiar with shadow people,
Sure.
They're kind of these ominous creatures that show up, and they look like they're all shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, oddly enough, I was doing an interview with somebody who had a shadow people's page, and she said, well, and by the way, they're shadow animals. And she just had this little one or two subset stories. And I started really focusing on these, and I started putting out calls. If you have any shadow animal stories, I'd like to read them. And so people, started sending me their stories. And by golly, it got to be really interesting because part of my interest was due to a paranormal investigation. And this is far before I did any of this additional research, and before I had done an interview. But we were in a house down in Tampa, and this woman, unfortunately, she was kind of poking at the ghost, if you will. She was trying to record it, and she was encouraging it, and, unfortunately, kind of in a way that you really shouldn't be doing. And so she called us in to take a look and see what we could find. Now, we're not exorcists, so we really will do, an investigation of the property. We'll do historical research, but my people are pretty good. I mean, I've worked with them for years. And it was interesting because we started noting the phenomena was mostly in the master bedroom. That's where the sensitives were picking things up. We had equipment, and it was going crazy up there. We had the power shut off. We did all the things that you do. And I had my video camera, and this was back in the day when the Sony infrared, the night shots, the Handycam night shots.
Right.
I actually had the kind, like the first generation. I had to be very careful filming because it actually would see through clothing. So you would see a lot of bra straps. I'm like, okay. So I had focused on another doorway, which was to the master bathroom. And I'm filming, and they're kind of standing around, and, we're reading equipment and trying to see what we can find. And all of a sudden, as I'm looking in through the camera, I swear I saw this little creature, this little shadow hybrid of a bobcat and a raccoon, and it was solid black, and it came charging straight at me, and I actually dropped the camera and stepped out of the way. I was so certain it was going to hit me, and there was nothing there, and there was nothing on the camera, which really sucked, but okay. And when I wrote it down, and just kind of, what do you do with that? And when I was interviewing this woman, and she started to describe these two little stories that she had, I started to realize they sounded an awful lot like the one I had. So I started compiling shadow animal stories, and most of them appear to be feline, but the second greatest category is canine. They're usually very solid. They can have a sensation of feeling very ominous or feeling very rushed. The image that I really had when I'm looking at this thing was that it was going to run into me, that it was trying to run through the room. And that seems to be a common trait. So I'm wondering if these shadow animals, and of course this is very highly speculative and not academic, so I'm going to put that asterisk out there, but it would be rather interesting if they were perhaps the notion of animals that were crossing over, quite literally crossing over. And to my surprise, once again, the page has grown. It's not the largest site that I have, but I do get submissions several times. So
really?
Usually right around October, and then they pick up again in May, which is kind of weird. But enough so that I now have shadow feline, shadow canines, other, because there's been a couple of other stories in there. They can be the size of a cow to the size of a mouse. So there's kind of a lot of mystery to that.
Yeah.
And I haven't really put it together yet, but I find it interesting. And then to have people say, I didn't know, I thought I was the only one. I'm like, yes, so did I.
Well,
Thank you.
Would you say that the after-death process or the after-death existence of animals mirrors that of humans?
Honestly, I'd have to think about that. In part because I have seen animals. I do a lot of rescue work, animal rescue. I have pug rescue that I work with here in Florida, and then I do have I have pocket pets, and I do half of them are rescued. So there's no breeding because until every animal has a home, I'm not adding more to our litany of animals that are out there. But I find that animals either will fight, or there will be a period where they will fight death. They do seem to struggle. There's panic. But then there's also this sense of acceptance and peace, and they oftentimes will simply recline, and I have seen, particularly my pocket pets, they just kind of, they'll sigh, and it's done.
Yeah.
I wonder about humans and how hard we fight against death. We have wonderful science, wonderful medicine, but there are studies that have indicated that we have made death very clinical, that we have separated ourselves from it so much that death is in the hospital. It's not like it used to be, let's say, in the Middle Ages, where your friends and family were with you as you passed.
Well, it seems today, after speaking to the members of the medical community that I have over the years of doing this show, is that those who are prepared and ready to cross stay on this side because of the wants and desires of the living that they're going to be leaving behind, and that they do make the transition when the family realizes that this person is just waiting for their permission to go.
And family is the number one reported phenomena.
Yeah.
Parents and grandparents, top rated. I mean, particularly parents. But I tend to agree, and even once they do cross over, I find it very interesting because people will say, yeah, every now and again I smell my father's cologne, or, I smell my grandmother cooking, spaghetti sauce, or I smell the basil, and I know she's here. And so they seem to do these periodic visits, but it's not, usually not a hardcore haunting. So if your parents are hanging out, you may have some issues that you might need to work through with them before they'll cross. But my own father, unfortunately, passed of cancer in 2012. And this I find very odd because, again, I've done at least, my estimate is about 450 cases since 1997, so I've been out and about. And usually there's a handful that I look at, and at that point I would say probably 30 or so, and I'm like, I have no explanation for this. And I used to talk with my father about it, and when he passed away, the following months, I thought, well, it's going to happen. Nothing did. But I inherited his car, and unfortunately it was a Saturn, and this is when the recall was going, and I was very stressed over this because it was another thing I had to deal with. And I was complaining to my mother on the phone when all of a sudden there was this clink on the counter behind me, and I turned around, and it was the Monopoly car from the Monopoly game that was in the garage that I had to go and find, that was under boxes and sealed shut. But this little car had landed right next to the recall letter. And I'm thinking, and there is no way. I remember my mother was on the phone, and she's quite a skeptic, and she said, are you sure you're alone in the house? Well, Mom, yeah, I'm just me in here. It was in the middle of the counter. There's no Pugs that can reach this. There's no way it could have fallen off a shelf because there are no shelves. And it was just one of those awarenesses. And, really after that time period, not much else happened. It kind of faded away. And I think you're right. I think it is that idea that they want you to know they're okay.
Right.
And that maybe there's a letting go on both sides. And maybe that's where the animal ghosts are coming from. And it might explain very, very much why they're domesticated. They're pets. We're not seeing cattle roaming through the streets, but I'm getting reports of pet pugs. Because there is that social bond that has formed between animals and humans, and that, perhaps it is kind of a last visit from both sides. Now, animals do tend to kind of move on their own. There's not very many long-term hauntings that I've found. There's one or, there are occasional, but usually I find most stories say that dogs pass on in about 6 months and cats about a year, and then the visits, completely stop. But, I think you're onto something there.
Do you think that ghosts or spirits have shelf lives?
Actually, that's kind of an interesting question, but overall I'd say yes. In history, there's only one really old ghost story that I can think of, and of course it's the Roman Legion in the UK.
Right.
But it seems like ghosts do fade, and it does make some sense, because if, again, they have existence, in the natural world, they are drawing substance, but the problem with the natural world is that we are confined to space and time. Liminal state beings, those that are in between, defy typical rules of time and space, but they're not free of them either. So I think so.
If there is reincarnation for humans, human souls, would there be reincarnation for animal souls as well?
Sure. Hinduism certainly talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the cow is one of the animals that's right before a human. So they're very helpful, they're very useful, and you can use the cow in many different ways. They produce protein without being killed with the milk. Urine was used for cleaning and or drinking, depending. The manure was for... I try not to think about it too much.
Thanks, Brandy.
A couple of years ago, chilled cow urine was very popular in certain parts of India, but you had the cow patties, which could be used for the planting and fire.
Yep.
So cattle were really seen as kind of that next step. Now, if you were a very bad human, you could also come back as an animal. Even in Hinduism, they say that the big difference between a human and an animal is something, and I'm going to spell it first, C-H-I-T, but it's pronounced chit,
right.
So that's why I'm spelling it. But it's that God awareness, the consciousness, the little angel and the little devil, right, that tells you right from wrong.
Uh-huh.
We have it, but animals don't. And so it actually does agree with the West, because in the West, that kind of that Greco-Roman ideal that comes into Christianity through the Neoplatonic and the Aristotelian ideas, but that we are similar to God because of our use of reason. It's what sets us apart.
All right, Brandy, please stand by. You and I have to take our final break for this hour. X-Zone Nation, Brandi Stark is our guest. www.spiritsofstpteresburg.com. And that is another reason why I will never go to India, because I will not know whether I'm getting cold urine or apple juice now. Oh, jeez. Thanks, Brandy. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as I try to wash that memory from my mind. Oh. Oh. I am Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. Brandi Stark and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone. Don't go away. You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Brandi Stark is our guest. Brandi is a professor of Humanities and Religious Studies at St. Petersburg College. And you can find out more about Brandi by going to her website at www.spiritsofstpteresburg.com. Brandi, what are some of the questions that you and the rest of your paranormal investigation team get from people when you go out and do meets and greets? What would you say the three top questions are?
Oh, that is a good question. Usually people, they want to know how ghosts manifest, how many we've seen, and usually it's something along the lines of proof. What proof have you gotten? And so I can every now and again say, oh, yeah, we have these wonderful EVPs. We just did an investigation last week, quite literally last Saturday, in which we had a knocking ghost, which was new for me, but very interesting. And so they really want to see what we've gotten. So once we kind of go through it, that's next up, yeah.
What is a knocking ghost?
I'll be darned. We were doing an investigation in this building, and it had an alleged suicide from about 60 years ago, but there was no inquest. It was very kind of hastily done. And every time we asked, is there somebody present, there would be this rap.
Oh, I see.
Just one. And once we got, we asked the name, the profession, the manner of death, and it would knock. And we had the homeowners, basically the homeowners with us. The team was out there. My group was out knocking on everything, trying to figure out what could be doing this. We absolutely had no cause, and it was only the case of this one individual. It was really wild. So my knocking ghost.
What advice do you have for listeners around the world tonight who might be considering becoming paranormal investigators?
I think I would find somebody that can mentor. I would try to go with somebody with a background that might support more reasonable forms of investigation. Technically, there is parapsychology, although that's mostly in Edinburgh these days, but be very careful. Make sure that you do a very good selection for a mentor. Make sure that you find an established group, and I usually do not recommend doing it alone.
Okay, so where would somebody go? For example, somebody who's listening on the internet tonight or who's going to be listening to one of our affiliates, where would they go?
Usually you can actually Google paranormal groups plus your location.
Right.
But when you look at the websites, try to find out if they have a mission statement. Try to see if they talk about any of the backgrounds or how they got started or their process. I think all of those things are very, very important. I have actually, unfortunately, and these groups did not make it, but I have heard of groups, even locally, that died out, but that were very antagonizing towards the dead, or, they were trying to exorcise things.
Oh, my God.
Or, cover all of your mirrors because that will keep the ghost trapped. And I'm thinking, So I think that's really important. I know that when we bring in new members, we do we do a public record screening. That's very important. But we interview them, and then there's a probationary period because you really have to get along with these folks, and you have to make sure that, you've got a group that you trust. Dealing with the supernatural is dealing with the supernatural. So make sure you've got folks that have your back.
Brandy, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I look forward to the next time you come back here and visit us in the X Zone. So until then, dear friend, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light, and keep the great work up, Brandy.
Thank you. I will.
X Zone Nation, my guest this hour has been Brandi Stark. Her website, www.spiritsofstpteresburg.com. I'll be back on the other side of the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.